All right. Well, Professor Zanouny, thank you again for being here. I appreciate this. First thing I want to begin with is I remember the first day I walked into your class on your introduction PowerPoint, you actually opened up with a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And the hadith, if I remember correctly, is all people are equal like the teeth of a comb. And I thought that was amazing because in its own way, it's like dawah, but it's not too preachy. It's just this is what it is, and then you just move on, and then the rest of the class just continues. I thought that was so amazing because I had never seen anyone else do something like that.
Right.
How did that? What made you want to do that?
Yeah. Um, I think first, thanks for having me. That's a really great opportunity to see one of my former students and having their own podcast. So that's really cool. And thanks for thinking of me. So I think for the hadith that I started with, that's about people are equal like the teeth of a comb. I think it kind of reflects my philosophy, and this is like how people should be like in real life. I think why I wanted to do this is because when we think of diversity or equality or equality, it's more than like a photo of different people. Like on a university's website, you see like people of different color, people wearing hijab or whatever. So diversity and equity is actually a practice, right? It's not just some photo somewhere or some program. So I feel that this actually captures the essence of how education should be. Not only education, like everything else in real life. So, and we wanted to make sure that the students know that, because if we are fair and we're treating them fairly, but they don't know that, right? It's if they perceive us otherwise, right? It's still not good. And we try to make that they are equal, really, even at the levels of the lab. Like when we're teaching labs, we want to make sure that different TAs, right, they're grading the same. So that's part of the equality, right? Because if you're on a TA, if your TA is harsh in grading, right, that's not fair, right? So we wanted to make sure that the equality, right, is at every way possible that we have control of in this class. So yeah, so
Yeah, I remember that was such a unique experience for me. And again, as I mentioned, the reason I loved it so much was because it's dawa, but it's not too preachy at face value. It's like, yeah, these are my beliefs. Here's a part of it, and then you just move on with the rest of the class. I love that. And speaking of
right,
TAs, I had a great TA, and my whole experience in your class was wonderful. I met several amazing people who I'm still in touch with today. Um, it was a fun time, and you contributed to that. I mean, you had a very easygoing class, and I remember towards the end of the semester, there was a group me, and you were a part of it. And people were making jokes, nothing crazy, but people were making jokes. And then on the final day, you revealed to everyone you were in there, and you showed the screenshots, and you partook in the laughter. And that was so cool because it showed you don't take yourself that seriously. You weren't angry. You joined everyone in that. Could you tell me more about that?
yeah. I think that was one of the most fun experiences I had at the university. I think at the end of the semester, I mean, every once in a while, I would receive emails or links to join a group. We never asked it or asked anyone to add us to the group. I mean, but as part of the class, I sometimes receive those invitations, and then okay, let's join these folks and have fun. And it's actually very helpful to see what the students are actually thinking, what their actual struggles are. So being part of that group kind of helped me see what the actual problems are, and I would actually take feedback and could sometimes adjust things accordingly, like change my style or extend deadlines. Um, yeah, I think it's fun and to see like students are actually saying. And when I brought it to the class, I think it was a fun experience. Um, I think. one of the, I don't know what semester you took this class, what year, but
2022,
okay.
the spring,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I think one of the most fun I had was in the fall of 2021, and I was having two of the students in the fly lab talked about. So the know we we have this, we have two sections, and I had one of the classes they took a test on one day, and I said, okay, folks, please do not shoot any of the questions because the folks tomorrow's class, the Friday's class, will have the exact same test. So I asked them not to talk about it. And then I learned that one of the students was talking about it in the fly lab. And then one of the students sent me an email telling me about it. So then I sent an email out to the entire class, like, hey folks, two students were discussing the test, and the student is described as Asian something. So it sounded like a criminal investigation, right? So then the students on group me, then they kind of were joking about it, and then said that the professor set a manhunt for this gentleman and a bounty on his head in the form of extra credit. And it was really fun to be part of that conversation. And then, as mentioned, when I bring it back to the class, like at the day of the test, right, to surprise them, it was fun. Right? I mean, we wanted to show that we are professors and we are human beings. I mean, so when we come to the class, I just come with my normal personality, right? I don't want to put like the professor mask or the professor personality or the. So yeah, so we shared it with the class. They love at it and they liked it. And I think it's actually a routine in most of my classes. Not necessarily the group me, but to start most of the tests with a little comedy show. Sometimes it's about admin, sometimes it's about the department. So yeah,
Yeah. Everyone I knew that took that class with me, we all left thinking good things about you. You had positive reviews. When have you always been this way though? Have you always been an easygoing personality? Because again, you were okay with laughing at yourself and the jokes that they were making, you know?
yeah,
You didn't take yourself so seriously. Have you always been that way?
yeah. So um, I think I've been always like an easygoing person. Not to brag, but I think it's I don't know if it was specific part of my teaching style. It was not really intended to be that way, but it's just when I come to the class, I practice my normal um, human being. Just if you have struggles, if you maybe laugh at yourself, laugh at the class. I mean, it has been part of my style and personality. But I think it's more recently I discovered that this style is working, like being yourself, especially for. I like to think I'm funny, but many people agree that I'm not. But I said, okay, let's take this, try to build this into the class. So if there are classes or lectures or lab that are long or boring or not digestible, so let's add some humor, right? Let's try to make it easygoing. Let's try to make it more fun. So I wouldn't say that every single thing I did in the class was just nature, right? Nature. Some of them I planned, right? I had specific jokes. I would find specific analogies, specific examples that people can relate to. But yeah, I would like to think I'm easygoing with the students. Maybe some of my admin would probably disagree that I'm easygoing, but at least on the students' part, I think I like to think I'm easygoing, and some of that jokes or fun is also designed. Is not we try to add it to the class.
So I really like what you said right there. Designed. Tell me about preparation. Have you always been good at preparation?
Well, definitely not. I've been terrible in the past. So I think when I started teaching, that was back long time ago when I graduated in Egypt in 2004. So, and then traveling to Saudi Arabia, I had to teach. So the way this goes is that when you graduate as the highest ranking student, which I did because I'm smart. So,
Wow.
so they hire you as a teaching assistant, and then you have to teach. Well, here's the problem though. The fact that you got an A or got high grades in that subject doesn't mean that you can teach, right? So teaching and understanding, those are two completely separate things. So when you graduate, they give you like, okay, here is the manual, here is the book, just go ahead and explain. And I look back at my slides and the way I used to teach and stuff like that, and students were happy at that time. But today I look back and realize that this was terrible, right? I was not really teaching well. That was really terrible. And I didn't really realize this until I started grad school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's when I was doing my PhD, and I also was teaching. But before I taught, we had to undergo like extensive training for about maybe 2 or 3 weeks, receiving a lot of how to teach, right? And I learned about all the stuff, all the teaching techniques that I have never practiced before. So, right, or I was just trying to do my best explaining things. But there is a science, right, on how to teach, right? There are learning theories that we never learned about, right? Most of university professors, most teachers aside, right? But if you're a university professor, an instructor, who don't really undergo a formal training to get a teaching certification, right? We don't. So I would say that my style has not been as good as it is today, if you agree that it's good today. So it has not been at the same level, right? It was definitely terrible, and over the years we're improving and improving. So, but I think this is one of the struggles that we like in the instructors community and the professor community. Most of us, like nobody taught us how to teach, right? So, I mean, there is faculty development workshops and lectures where professors go and learn, but it's not part of your training when you're getting hired as a professor that you have to get that specific certificate, right? So, yeah, my style has not been always that way. So,
It has evolved over time. Naturally, huh? Yeah,
yeah.
no, that's interesting to me. Um, you were talking, when you were saying, some of these jokes that you say in class, they're designed. That's fascinating to me because I think sometimes people, if it doesn't feel natural, then I won't work on it. I won't say it. But there's also another aspect of it where you have to prepare to make it seem natural. You have to prepare to make it seem. You have to design it. The art of teaching, as you said, you have to learn it to make it seamless.
Yeah. I think when I'm saying it's not natural, it's not like that I'm coming with these things on the spot, right? So all the stories and jokes I tell, they're true stories, but about like when do I tell them, right?
Yes.
Sometimes they would come something I'd remember something that like on the spot, but also some other times I have some stories or jokes that I know would fit in that specific day at that specific time. So preparing for a class, I mean, I spend time preparing to the class. You asked about this earlier. Um, but I prepare a long time. So I know I have a class maybe on, it's not like this week I'll plan my lecture for next week. Actually, I think about any topic or class I teach, maybe like several months ago, several months before. Actually, there's one of the YouTube episodes that I'm going to be releasing soon. And one of those, actually, I have been thinking about it for like several years. You won't believe that.
Wow.
So it's not necessarily that not every episode or lecture takes that time. But if I know that I'm planning to deliver this in the future, right? I'm not planning to do it this now, but over time you're coming with new ideas and you fine tune and refine it. So, um, or for example, if I find something cool related to genetics or something, I would say, okay, this is something cool that I can fit somewhere in that class. I'm not sure exactly which lecture, but I have this in my back pocket and planning to use this. So preparation just takes a lot of over time. So ideas and content kind of gestates and kind of matures. So, but if you ask me to prepare a lecture for tomorrow, I can do it, but it's not going to be that engaging as I want. So it takes time to prepare, and again, once you deliver it, you realize, okay, this was awesome, and this piece was bad, and this could be better, right? So once you deliver the lecture or the class, then you learn. It's like you always like, shoot, I wish I did this. I wish I said that. So I'm sure you experienced this also in podcasts. Like, I wish I asked this question, or so yeah. So it develops, and it's kind of think of them as iterations. So
Yeah, it's a creative process. And Rick Rubin, he's got this book called The Creative Act, and there's a part in there where he talks about, he gives the example of a seed. Let's say you plant a seed, it'd be foolish of you to want that oak tree to manifest immediately. It's going to take time. And so, as you said, for that YouTube video, for example, it's been in the plans for several years, but that happens. Eventually it comes out, but the processing behind it, who knows how far it goes back. And you're right, like with this podcast, I've been wanting to have you on here since I began this podcast. And I reached out, I think, a year ago or so. And now we're finally here. So it happens to me frequently with a bunch of guests. I plan to have them on, but how long does it take for me to actually get to it always varies.
right, yeah. I think it's if you have when I have the way I do my lectures or channels like videos. It's just you have ideas. Maybe you never have the time to do everything you want, but I have maybe about a couple hundred topics in my head, and also on notes. Right, I put them on notes, and every time I think about, I have these topics that I want to talk about, and you go out in the street and you um, like see something or something happens, or you watch something on TV, and okay, this would fit in one of those 200 topics at that specific. I could just dump it there, right? And when I'm ready to work on it, I have a bunch of ideas, a bunch of examples, and a bunch of real life situations. So yeah, it takes time, and it evolves, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Also, it was funny you said that about the podcast. Like, I wish I said that. It's so true. Before I had a podcast, I used to watch the king of podcasts, Joe Rogan. And there'd be times where he'd be talking to someone, and I'd be thinking to myself, why did he respond that way? Or why didn't he ask this question? This could have gone in a totally different way. But when you do this yourself, you realize it's very different being a participant versus being an observer. I can even go back to one of my old videos and be like, why didn't I ask that question? Or why didn't I take it in this direction? Because it's different being a participant versus the observer.
Right. Yeah. True. So I think part of being a participant or observer, I think one thing that I've learned, lecturing my own, like recorded my own lectures in class.
Mm.
So when I don't really have the time to rewatch them, but sometimes when I do, it's kind of obvious. Okay, why did you do this? Why did you miss this part? Why did you not say that? Right? So it's obvious and it's clear when you. So if you get to do it a second chance, right, you would probably do it better, right? You'll probably miss other stuff, right? But every time, like you're getting better and better and better. So
Yeah. That I feel like genetics is sort of the evidence of that as well, right? In its own way, that over time things get better and better and better. Would you say that, or would you see it some differently?
well, with so if you're talking about like general, like from living organisms and humans, and they're getting better and better and better, is that um not necessarily. I mean, we have not really. So of course there is part of selection, natural selection, and you get things get better over time. I don't know if this is like an absolute statement that you can make that everything is always getting better. Um,
I just
Have
realized you're right because I mean all organisms die. Doesn't always get better and better and better.
Yeah, but I don't know if we can have like a blunt statement that genetics is always getting better. I have to think about this before saying yes, because I think humans, we have gotten better, and it's true that like the survival of the fittest, and the bad genetic gets swept out, the bad alleles gets removed from the population, but that doesn't mean that every single, like the human being population, every single trait or the combination of traits that we have today or that any individual has is like the best. I think there are still a lot of traits that could be improved. And I think we're probably stepping into the territory of you're treating the human population as one thing, right? One big body, and you want to improve by eliminating some other folks, right, who have maybe less favorable genetics. And that's kind of, we're stepping back to the topic of like eugenics and stuff like that. So, um, but generally, genetics are getting better because there is selection happening. And if you have better genetics, you produce more. You have, if you're small, so I have 9 children, right? So you leave more progeny, you leave more offspring. So, but I would be reluctant to say that genetics is always getting better because there are also some terrible traits that are out there. So, but I can think of examples as we continue the discussion that probably come up with some of those
One of
examples.
the things that interests me the most about genetics is the maternal effect. You know, specific like for balding, the maternal effect with balding. Like if your mom's father was bald, then you know there's a good chance that the child of the mother will probably face balding eventually. You've been in this field for a while. What is something about genetics that really interests you in particular?
So I think there's a lot of interesting things about genetics. Something specifically, I think probably one of the things is the ability to predict genetic diseases, right? If somebody
Mm.
has a specific disease that they don't know about, and through genetic testing, they learn about it, I think it's like helping them kind of avoid specific, try at least be aware or watching out that you have more risk to this disease. I think it might be helpful. Although it's not always good to know that you have specific genetic disease. And there are examples, I think we can talk about that, in which if you know that you have a certain genetic disease that could be actually bad and makes you like it makes it like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? So there are examples of that. But that's what I like about genetics, like the genetic testing. Um, a lot about genetics. I think there's nothing specific, but I can.
That's interesting. You said the self-fulfilling prophecy with genetics.
Yeah. So I think there was one example of one experiment done, I think in 2017 or like a few years ago, and they um, were testing like different people for their athletic ability, right? If they have the genes to be good athletics, and they had two groups of people, and they said, okay, and each group of those they had some of those have a specific gene, I don't remember its name, that makes them good athletics, and it gives them more endurance. They can run more, and then they have another the same gene. There's another version of that gene. If you have that version, right, you are less able to run, and you're not as good an athlete. So the interesting thing is that they had two groups, these two groups of people, and they tested them. They took DNA samples to see exactly if you have the good version of the gene or the bad one, right? And they have divided them into two groups. So you have two groups, one group that has both good and bad genetics, and the other group also has a mix, people who have good genetics and bad genetics. And what they have done is that they said, okay, group number one, they didn't tell them about their genetics yet, right? They had them run on a treadmill and they tested them, right? And once they tested them, they said, okay, now listen, now you have the good gene, right? And told this guy you have the bad gene. And they found out, so they didn't really tell them the true results. So some of them had the good athletic gene and they told them you have the bad version, right? And the other guy, the other group, they told them you have the good genetics while they did have bad genetics. So, and they allow them to run again, right? After they learn about their genetic data. And now when they were running, like when they run this again, the results were actually surprising. They found that the effect of knowing about the genetics had like a really big effect. And it's actually sometimes bigger than the actual physiological effect, right? So if you have a bad gene, just knowing that if you have a good gene and they told you have the bad gene, right? That had a bad effect on your running ability. Even if you have the good gene, but they just told you that you have the bad gene. So, and they found this, that the second time they have you run on the treadmill, right, until you're done, until you cannot no more. So, and they found that the people who were told you have the bad gene, they stopped running about 22 seconds early. And while the folks who were not told, they just kept going, right? So, and the point of this is that if you're running, right, and you may thinking that 22 seconds is not really a big deal. So, and it actually is, especially if you're an athlete. So, if you're running a specific, you have your maximum, like you reach a point where you cannot run anymore, right? Maybe about 7 minutes, 8 minutes at a specific speed. And that, if you do this over and over again, the variability is not going to be that much, right? So the same goes for running. If I'm running 100 meter, I can run it in maybe 17 seconds, right? If I do it again, the variability is not going to be like 12 seconds or 25, right? It's going to be very close to your point, right? I ran it in 17 seconds, right? Or 16, that's actually a true number, 100 meters. So if you do it over and over again, you will find yourself like very, very close. It's not going to be difference in seconds or minutes, right? But they found that the folks that were told that you have bad genetics, they stopped early. So, and this happened like when they're running on the treadmill and they get tired, right? They would be thinking, okay, yeah, that's because of my bad genetics. So they would stop, right? Versus the folks who were told that you have the good genetics, right? If they experience the same tiredness, they'll say, well, I have good genetics, but I mean, tiredness is part of the process because I'm running, right? I got to be tired, so I keep going. So that was really fascinating, is that it's not always good to learn about, it's not always useful, right? Some information is not really helpful because you would be thinking, okay, I don't have the good genetics, I'm not going to do well, so I'm going to just give up. So,
Yeah, that is very interesting. And it's like when you give news of the bad genetics to certain people, it's like a criticism in a way. So I feel like the inverse would also be true, where if you refrain from giving someone a compliment, if you refrain from telling them, "Hey, you have a good gene," it could also stunt growth.
so if you did not tell them that you have a good gene,
Well, I'm giving the example of like if there's something good about someone and you don't give them that compliment, well, it could also stunt their progress in a way. You know,
yeah,
the good
that's
gene is like a compliment. Like, hey, by the way, you have a good gene. Oh, it increases confidence in a person. It's like the compliment, it increases confidence.
right. That's true. And I think that group, the folks who were told you have the good genetics, while they did have good genetics, it didn't really improve their performance, but it let
Oh,
them maintain their performance.
Allowed them to persist.
Yeah, to have the
That's
persistence.
interesting. That is
Yeah,
interesting.
I was expecting something other. Reading this paper, I was expecting a totally different result, right? That you told them you
Mhm.
have the good genetics, gonna increase, but there's like a physical limit that they have reached.
Hmm. It
But I
reminds me
think,
of a story that my grandmother told me. She read it in the papers where, there was a criminal who was sentenced to death, and they told him, "Hey, we're gonna inject you with snake." They showed him a snake, and they said, "We're gonna inject you with snake venom." And so when it was time to execute him, they gave him a placebo injection. But he was so frightened because he saw the snake, and they told him, "We're gonna inject this into you," that he actually died. I was like, wow, thoughts can really kill.
yeah, that's actually true. The fact that it has like a physiological effect, right? Even it's a placebo, but this is what you think. So I think, I mean, there is a reason why they in medical experiments they always have a placebo because there is a known effect for that. So I think even the experiment we mentioned about the running and the athletes, they found that there are physiological. They took physiological measurements. They didn't only see when they stopped. They looked at the um, carbon dioxide exchange. They looked at different physiological indicators, and they found that they did indeed change because of the
Mm,
hormones, because of what they were thinking. So um, yeah, so there's an actual physiology. It's not just yeah thinking it triggers some physiological effects and that can be measurable. Yeah, somebody could. I wouldn't be surprised. Somebody could die because of the thoughts. So
yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask you more about how you got involved in all this. Tell me about yourself in Egypt.
yeah, um, I was born in Egypt, and then as a kid traveled to Germany with my father. He was doing his PhD in Germany.
Wow. Do you speak German
So
too?
um, I'm Finnish. I kind of forgot. I attended school in Germany as a kid, but I kind of forgot most of it. So, but then I went to back to Egypt. I finished my elementary education, high school, and I was really into genetics in high school. And part of this was my knowledge of one of my father's acquaintances. He was a professor at the university, and he
Mm,
studied crop science and specifically genetics. And he was like a great model for me. And I used to read um, genetics books about genetic engineering, like in English in high school. And that was not very typical. But then um, when it came to college, right, I wanted to do medicine. And specifically, I wanted to do medicine because I wanted to do genetics mainly. That was my reason. But then I was not able to get to medical school. My grade was just a little bit less than med school. And the way this happens in Egypt is that once you finish high school, right, you go to med school directly. You don't have to get a bachelor's degree. So I said, well, okay, now I have I can't go to med school, but I actually realized that the College of Agriculture is actually the only college that has a department of genetics. So
mm,
even the med school in my university they didn't have a genetics department. I said, okay, well, then I was not going. Even if I got the grades to go there, I probably wasn't going to go there because I really want to study genetics. So the college that had genetics department was the College of Agriculture. But at that year, the college had they took very low grade, right, to get into agricultural school. Just you need to have like 50%. And my grade was really high. I said, okay, I feel like a little shame going to a low college. That was my thinking. I said, okay, let me not go to agriculture. And because I have high grade, maybe like 90% or something, I should probably find another college. So I went to study um, tourism and like the hospitality industry, right?
mm,
Hospitality and tourism. And that was back in 2000 or something. I said, because that college, it required you have to have a high grade. in Egypt back then. So I studied there for 1 year, not because I love tourism, I obviously didn't, but just because I had a high grade. And that kind of reflects the type of thinking that we had as maybe when we were younger, right? Our thing is like very narrow, very limited, very
Yeah, prestige.
right. But then I said, I took 1 year studying hotels and tourism and Egyptian monuments and remains. And
Wow.
after that, I said, okay, this is not for me. And I decided to go back. I said, okay, let me now go to agriculture. Even if a lot of people have been telling me you have to go to agriculture, my dad, but I just didn't like it. I didn't. I felt like it would be a waste of my high grade, but that was a full decision, right? I kind of wasted 1 year, and then I studied um, agriculture for 4 years, and every single year, thank God, I was the highest ranking student.
Wow.
4 years, and in the first year, that was like an eye opener. I said, okay, I was going to waste a lot of resources if I continue in tourism. Like I came here and I have been the highest ranking student. So when I graduated, when you graduate in Egypt, they hire you as a teaching assistant, then you progress, right? The assistant professor. But I was not hired. I was the number one hiring, like ranking person, and I was not hired because of some political issues, right? They didn't like the way I was part of in the university, and they had the second, third, and fourth ranking student. And at that time, for me, for the 20 years old Abdallah, that's kind of difficult, devastating. I didn't like it. But then I got to work in the agrochemicals industry in one of the chemical companies. And then I got a scholarship to study in Saudi Arabia to do my master's. And I traveled to do my master's, got my master's, and worked. And that's what I actually got a lot of opportunity to pursue study genetics.
Mm.
So, and during my master's, I worked at what's called the Center of Excellence in Biotechnology. And I did a lot of, that's where I learned most about molecular markers and PCR and did a lot of work in genetics. Graduated then, and then I had the idea of also I wanted to study cancer, human cancer. So it kind of tells you that as you develop, you kind of are into different thoughts and ideas and projects. And I wanted to study. I worked as a researcher in a proteomics data like center. They do like a lot of drug discovery, and I didn't really have any cancer experience, but genetics was my um, Trojan horse, right? Because I had a lot of experience with genetics, it allowed me to. They said, okay, this guy knows some genetics. We can use him in other things, and to work.
Wow.
And then, yeah, that's when I got the chance to. I did my master's, and then I worked for a year or two. But that's where I got a lot of opportunities, met a lot of scientists because King Saud University, where I studied and worked, is very open. They have a lot of international scholars, a lot of Nobel Prize winners. They come to the university, they give lectures on a monthly basis. So that was a really rich environment, a lot of resources, way more than we had back in Egypt. And that actually allowed me later to, was one of the reasons that allowed me to come here. So,
Wow.
yeah, I had a lot of different, I think I wanted to continue, but then when we had the Egyptian revolution, we went back to Egypt and I applied to. I wanted to study in the U.S. Right? I wanted to do my PhD in the U.S. I mean, I came to Texas like 2011. I
Mm.
participated in a conference called the Agronomy Meeting. It's like a big. It's like the pilgrimage of people working in agronomy. I traveled on my own. I said, okay, I'm gonna travel. I give a talk at that conference, and I did give a talk. And during that talk, I made an advertisement. I said, folks, I'm looking for a PhD opportunity. If you have a scholarship, if you have space in your lab, please, I want to study. That was back in 2011. And later, I got the opportunity to study at University of Wisconsin-Madison, do genetics, teaching plant breeding and plant genetics. And that's where I also had to be a TA, teaching assistant. And that's where really when I learned most of the teaching. most of the a lot of the techniques. Teaching, I didn't really know much about teaching before going to the University of Houston, not Houston, University of Wisconsin, Madison. So, and then I ended up in Houston. So,
I like how you said that genetics was your Trojan horse. That was a good bit of language there. And I feel like every person should have a Trojan horse up their sleeve where they're trying to get their foot in the door of something, and this is how they do it. By the way, I feel like you would have been a great tour guide. Were you ever giving any tours when you were in that school?
yeah, I did not. I didn't really give any tours because I just spent 1 year, but um, I didn't give any tours. But I think I don't know why you say that. Maybe because the way I interact. I don't know.
You have a wonderful personality. You know, I could see
Thank
it.
you.
It'd be very natural.
Thank you. I think I was involved with not with the College of Tourism, but I did a lot of community work because in Egypt I
Oh,
ran for the one of the labor unions. I was representing about maybe 10,000 or more people who work in
well,
the agriculture labor union. So we had to talk with the people. I was representing like the Secretary General for my state. So we had to talk to people, to the farmers, you had to talk to lawmakers. So I kind of got that type of community engagement. So I like talking to people. Probably seen that I just love talking. I've been talking for the past 40 minutes nonstop. You've probably noticed. So
yeah.
yeah,
No, it's been awesome to hear you. And you've had this big journey. Is there one particular lesson you derive from it and you're like, I'm glad I went through all of this because I learned this in particular?
yeah. I think the one lesson, I mean, there's a bunch of lessons, but the one that stands out that every time a door closes, right? For me, I'm sure that this door closed because there is a better way. There is a better path, right? There's a message that, okay, this place, this door is not for you. This is not your opportunity, right? There's something better waiting for you. And at every single time I have noticed everything that I was unhappy that I lost in the past, every time, right, God gives me something every time better. So had I worked at Mina University at that time back in 2004, I would have been stuck there. Like all of my colleagues now, they are in the same job, a professor in Egypt. So, but every time a door closes, right? Maybe you are not happy at that time, but when you're done with that moment, right? If you're having a tantrum or unhappy about it, okay, 20 years later, right, you will look back and say, okay, I'm happy that this did not happen. I'm happy that I didn't continue with that job. I'm happy that this, right? So it's probably telling you something, right? Maybe you're in the wrong place. This is not your opportunity. So, yeah, so every time a door closes, there is definitely another door. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but I've published two books. And the first one, I got the idea for it in late 2020, and I really wanted it out like beginning of 2021. That didn't happen. And then I wanted it out by the end of the summer of 2021. Didn't happen. I wanted it out by the winter of 2021. It didn't happen. And I just kind of I put it to the side and I didn't think about it. And then the following year, 2022, by the end of the spring in June, I finished writing it. And then it released, in the fall, November 2022. And I looked back and I realized, wow, this was the perfect time for it to come out. Because prior to that, in the during COVID, I didn't have a huge social circle at the time. Nobody would have heard about it. It wasn't the right time. Any time before then was not the right time. And I couldn't have realized it without looking back. So I agree with you. Rejection is just telling you what's not right for you, things not working out is just information that this is not your way.
right. Cool. Yeah, and it's at the moment, maybe it's not easy for us to understand it the way we do after we pass it. Right? In the moment, it will be difficult, right? Because you're not able to do what you want, but later. So I think in the moment, I think we have to try to develop that maturity that okay, now this is didn't work the way I want, so let's just try to overcome it. And we have to be real, it's not always easy because you want something, right? And you just can't get it, so that makes you upset or not happy. But yeah, over time, it's I think there's a religious saying about Imam Ali, I think, where he talks about humans that people are maybe stressed about things that they didn't get, that was never meant for them, right? You were never going to get that because it's not for you. And on the same uh, he says also that, and people are afraid of missing things, right, that they will never miss, right? I'm afraid of not going to med school, for example. Well, Allah has prescribed that you are going to go there, right? So you don't have to be worried about something that um, will eventually happen. So I think part of it is
Beautiful.
destiny, believing in the
Yeah. People are afraid of missing things they will never miss. That's beautiful.
right.
Man, that's so true. Yeah, and that's beautiful, from Ali radiallahu anh. And I think there's also a hadith from the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he says something like, "How beautiful are the affairs of the believer when something good happens to him, alhamdulillah, thank God. When something bad happens to him, alhamdulillah, thank God."
Right.
Yeah, the optimism. The optimism is a really powerful tool. As we're talking about thoughts, it can really change a lot of things.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Professor Zanouny, I really enjoyed this conversation. It was wonderful seeing you again and speaking to you. I think it was so funny. I was in Mass Katie one time, and then you grabbed me by the back. Like, hey, I remember you. It's like, oh my God, I don't know you. I didn't know you come out here.
Yeah, we moved to Katy a couple of years ago, and I've been in Katy. I think it's beautiful
Yeah,
community.
that's an
Very,
Egyptian hub.
you could say so, but there's also a lot of it's not Egyptian dominated, but there's a lot of Egyptians, a lot of Arabs, a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
different.
No, it was a wonderful mosque. I love that
Yeah.
place. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you felt like you wanted to say, but you didn't get a chance to, or something on your mind that you wanted to express?
Um, I think possibly something related to uh, learning specifically. I think it's about how we instructors and students we go through. We spend a lot of time teaching and learning, and the single lesson that was never delivered in schools and high schools and even colleges is that students we just keep learning about different topics, geography, science, but the single lesson that was should have been delivered is how to learn. Right? Students we graduate and we never learn like how to learn. We are under the impression that I have to have a teacher to force feed me um, the material, but we are never taught how to learn. So I think this is like a great opportunity, and maybe in the future, um, I think students should be taught how to learn, right? Even on their own, because most of the stuff is we can learn, right? So at some point, of course, you will have to have a teacher, right? But the vast majority of things should be we should be able to learn a lot of stuff. So I think as an educator, I feel like this is something I should point out
Hmm.
because every year we are graduating a lot of students who kind of feel that learned helplessness that they can't just learn, right? And this applies to students in high school, in college. If you're maybe preparing to study the MCAT, or if you want to learn AI in this dynamic um, environment now, right? I think learning how to learn is really one important skill that we as you mentioned, we're going through life, different experiences, different things, but it's important to kind of learn how to learn. So
I'm glad you mentioned that. And of course, there's many different ways to it. Is there one particular way you can think of that you'd advise people? This is a way you could learn how to learn?
yeah, so I think one way is to first kind of understand the different how learning is happening, like the different learning theories, right? So just learn and read about the different learning theories, how learning is happening, right? Like there's maybe the cognitive theory, how we learn, about thinking, about recalling the information. Then there is the behaviorism, like how we learn in response to stimuli from the environment, being praised or being afraid of punishment, such as grades,
Mm.
like grades and missing grades is part of that. Then there's also the when you doing by like learning by experimenting and reflecting, you do an experiment. So I think the first step is to actually learn about these learning theories, that they exist and how we actually learn, right? So there are different theories. So maybe reading about those theories, and there's a lot of articles, but also there are practical um, ideas and tips that you could do to improve your learning. One of them is to asking, right? To ask questions, keep asking questions: how, why, what. Ask the questions. There's also asking questions, and also being comfortable not knowing. So, and this is one of what the important ones, because if you are uncomfortable when you don't know, right? It's uncomfortable, then you don't want to go to that place, right? So then you would have like a self-defense. You don't want to read anything because you will discover that there are stuff that you don't know, and that would make you uncomfortable, right? So that would make you avoid that um, topic completely. So being comfortable being that you don't know is one of the um, also option, like one of the tips that can help people kind of learn if you're comfortable being ignorant about a specific topic. So um, yeah, a lot of things. I think also your ability to read and summarize things, that's also a skill, because when you summarize, right, you're using a different part of the brain. So summarizing is your ability to generate and synthesize your own thoughts about a topic. So um, yeah, a lot of, and I think that's part of the reason there was an article called "The Pen is Merrier Than the Keyboard" or the PC. Like when you write things or summarize things your own, it's better than using a keyboard, because you have to think. If a professor, somebody's talking and you are taking notes, you probably can type as fast as they are, right? But you cannot handwrite at the same speed.
Yeah,
So you have to take that information and digest it and synthesize it in a new way with less words.
yeah.
So
Also, typing is generic, and what I realize about my own writings when I do it on hand versus the keyboard is I recognize my handwriting and the color of the ink and the style, and I'm like, I know exactly where I was when I wrote that, and it just the memories could contribute to learning it better. But I wanted to point out, I like how you said ask questions, being okay with asking questions, because I remember when I was younger in high school, I'd ask a lot of questions to teachers. And in different classes, like classmates would sort of laugh or just kind of get annoyed by my questions. But it didn't phase me. And it was also interesting to me that this one girl on my bus who was in one of my classes, she pointed it out to me. She said, they always laugh when you ask questions, and I don't get it because they're like regular questions. And so I think that's great advice for students. Just keep asking questions if you don't get anything, and hopefully, the instructors are also not annoyed with them. Hopefully they're like, okay, let me contribute to the feedback here.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Professor, for being here. Again, I had a great time. I appreciate your time, and you have a great rest of your Gemma. Okay?
thank you so much, Omar. And I didn't really know that you had a book, so please send me those and
Oh
send me a
yeah,
copy.
yeah. Of course, yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Omar. It was nice talking to you, and kind of you reminded me of my journey, and kind of nice to talk about things that happened in the past. So
Yeah, yeah.
thanks for having
I
me.
I mean it. You were a very relaxed, easygoing instructor, and that's wonderful. You always that's something to be admired. So thank you.
Thank you, Omar.